Hello and welcome to this video with 19 patches for more advanced oscillator techniques with the Sputnik Modular Variable Waveform Generator. Let's check out a bit of what's to come. This video is sponsored by Sputnik Modular. Now the Variable Waveform Generator, and I'll pop an image on screen, is a Buchla style discrete analog oscillator but with hard sync instead of soft sync. So we're going to demo this module, present a load of patches you can try out, and just have lots of oscillator fun for those of us that like to have fun with oscillators. It's a good Friday night. So running down the panel and the features, have a square wave at the normal core pitch, a sub that can be -1 octave or -2 octaves, so there's 3 potential octaves there of tuning. The square wave has edge PWM, which is typical PWM for an analog oscillator, and then Centre PWM, which is a more unique shape with a really lovely chorus kind of FM overtone. The sine wave has a wave folder that can be symmetrical, or asymmetrical. We have a 3-way toggle for the saw wave, typical downward single ramp in the middle. A double saw that we can animate. Or a triple saw wave that we can animate. The triangle has an odd and even shaper, which is that warm, analog, soft clipping style distortion for the odd. And even adds more gain to the positive portion and less to the negative, giving us this asymmetrical shape with more harmonics. Tuning, nice wide coarse range, fine tune, VCO and LFO switch if you want to bring this down to be more complex LFO. All of these wave shapes have CV and attenuation for it. Got volt per octave, linear FM and exponential FM, combining them works really well, and a hard sync. Without further ado, let's dive in some patches. So the idea of this patch was to mix the sub into both sides of a stereo patch, just some stereo filtering after the oscillator, and use the square that's animated and a saw that's animated as the left and right sides. So I've got a mixer mixing the sub and the square. And then on the other side, I have another 2-channel mixer mixing the sub and the saw, blending the sub into both of them. We've got that kind of unison in the middle of the sub that's on both sides, giving us a kind of mono strength to the mix, if you like. pulse and saw, animated with LFOs, into a filter, for Proctive, sub in mono, pulse and saw on both sides, big sound. So here I'm exploring the onboard VCAs on the Fold to actually cut down and close off my sound like a traditional VCA. My output is this direct output, there's nothing else going on, there's no external VCAs, and I'm modulating it with quite a complex envelope which is giving us this nice dynamic feeling pattern. Turning down my drums. By default, we can't turn down the sound of the folder. But with a little negative voltage, and just watch that blue line come down there on the scope, and we'll see and hear the volume go down. We can actually silence the oscillator. So then when I add my envelope in my mixer, the oscillator itself is somewhat of a complex voice. And it makes for a really interesting kind of brooding bass, these enveloped folds that then disappear. So let's explore Audiorate Wavefolding. And I just love this life and animation it's giving this sine wave. So here's tuning up the modulator to nearly the exact same frequency as the oscillator itself. Here's some higher tunings. Some nice harsh sounds there if that's what you're looking for. And here's a final bit of exploration. I of course love this stuff. So I figured we can't have animated Supersaws without making something pretty trancey. And it's a two-layer patch, with the Supersaw going into a filter and some effects, and the sub going into the Spectral processor and a VCA. There's envelopes controlling the filter for the top line, and an envelope for the VCA, and let's start with that sub. If I just let this sound drone, listen to that Spectral processor doing the business. Nice clean sub, enveloped as a layer underneath my main sound. Now turning that off, here's the animated saw wave. Filter open fully there, just big and rich. Nice and cutting without the LFO modulating it. But I love that big wide triple D tune. So let's take a listen to this overdrive, this distorting triangle wave shaping. Here's some odd shaping. It's got that lovely kind of soft clip tangential curve. Even harmonics. You can see it's more asymmetrical, it's more kind of kinked together on that bottom part of the wave. Almost like a PWM effect. Now with some modulation, let's start with just an envelope. Let's mix in an LFO for some more complex modulation. We could try changing that LFO to say an Audiorate source. going to look at using the sub output as a sub audio wave shaper. Now I'm not shaping the sub, I'm using the sub itself to wave shape the other waveforms. And by simply patching it in to modulate the shape of that drive on the triangle, we start to get some interesting and unique tones. Now if I go 2 octaves lower, and because this is half the frequency, it's modulating much nicer than just using the normal pulse. And that's because for every cycle of the triangle, we'd get the same cycle of modulation from the square. When the sub is lower in pitch, we have 2 cycles of a normal triangle to the 1 octave below sub. So you can see we get some different wave shapes. And again, longer negative voltage from the sub, but longer positive voltage because it's half that frequency again when we go to -2. Some different wave shapes. This works really well on the folder, where again you can see the wave shape is vastly different whether the sub is in its positive or negative part of its waveform. This is going to be really interactive with the actual settings that you set for the manual controls. So green trace on the scope and green cables are my oscillator we're listening to directly. Blue cables, blue trace is my modulator. Now we'll start with linear FM, which is AC coupled, meaning meant for audio. And if we modulate this wave with this one, let's play with the tuning of this modulator. We can start to get into a nice harmonious tuning relationship. It's very much a soft overtone. And you can hear both the upper harmonics and the subharmonics are changing as I sweep the pitch. Really lovely FM tone. FM. So here we're going to look at feedback FM, where we feed outputs from the variable waveform generator back in to control the FM, the frequency, with the linear and exponential inputs. And we can mix those together. And let's hear this with the pitch sequence still, but no effects, no low pass gate. Square wave sub. Really great overtones of low amounts of linear feedback FM there. Croaky mid-range loveliness. And that triangle to exponential FM. So here I'm looking at the variable waveform generator as a complex LFO. Now here I'm using the triangle wave output with no drive, it's that blue trace there, nice and simple on data, to pan my sound around. And then the fold output, which is the green trace, is modulating my filter's cutoff. Now of course, modulating your modulators is something that Modular is very good at. So here I'm using another triangle wave from a different LFO, simply to modulate the fold amount. Patching in another triangle wave into exponential FM, we can start to move the rate of these around as well. And let's use another LFO to play around with the drive on that triangle. So, super complex LFO behaviour. Triangle for the pan, fold for the cutoff, modulating fold amount, drive amount, and the rate by using an LFO into FM. So here we're exploring PWM, and we have these two PWM types. Edge, which is typical PWM that you'd find on most analog oscillators, and Centre, which is a bit more of a unique pulse width modulation. And we can actually push this modulation to silence the wave. So if I start with this all the way down, and then add some modulation, and we could use this to gate the waveform on and off. And it works the other way, even though the slider will not actually cut the sound off at the top. Some positive modulation added to it will cut the waveform on and off. So here we're looking at Audiorate modulation. Blue cables, blue trace is the Sputnik square wave output. Green trace there, this sine wave is my modulator. Now we've got to get it somewhat in tune for it to sound harmonious. So let me play around with this octave shift and tuning. And as we go up those octaves, some really nice sounds to be had. So here we'll take a look at building a noise oscillator, and we'll start super noisy as we are. I'll pull it back and we'll go back to the basics of the patch. So here's my bass sine wave pitch. Now let's just try modulating things with the noise, with the idea of building this noise oscillator, noisilator, noscillator. Think of some cool words and put it in the comments. So first, we'll go into the volt per octave, most kind of drastic. That's white noise, pink noise, red. We could sync. There's something you can sweep for effects. It kind of sounds like a pan boiling over or something. Instead of modulating pitch or sync, we can modulate the fold amount, which will keep the pitch stable. And it's much more like mixing noise and the oscillator together. Different results from different noise sources. So here we're looking at sync. Now listen to the difference by sweeping the pitch when it's synced to when it's not, and I'll just pull out the cable to demonstrate. You can hear that kind of sing-song of harmonic series sweeping up and down. If we look at the other waveforms, it's a little bit more obvious what's going on. You can see that point at which it's syncing when the rising edge of the square wave hits that sync. And a really common thing to do with synced oscillators is to sweep the pitch with an envelope. You get these great sync sweep tones that I'm sure many of you will recognise. Try that with the pulse again. While that's doing that, let's take up the rate of the sync. I'm just going to come an octave up. And that wow kind of vocal sound you get, I'm sure is recognisable. So So here I'm jamming around with a patch where I'm syncing the Variable Waveform Generator to another square wave from another oscillator. This is a static waveform, and I'm volt per octave sequencing this one, so the sync tones are changing. So removing everything, this is the volt per octave sequenced oscillator synced against this square wave. There's nothing else going on except it's in a low pass gate that's just been plugged. Adding some PWM. Getting that shifting pulse width with the sync is a really nice tone. I also have an envelope going to exponential FM. Create these classic sync sweeps. Gets really percussive at higher levels. Just a little bit of that and a little bit of PWM really animates this sync tone. There's then some effects. It is being ducked against a kick drum in my beat. And that's the patch, some fun sync tones. So here we have some nice little dancing sync tones. So this is the Variable Waveform Generator hard synced through the sync input to a square wave. So if I sweep the pitch, some really great tearing kind of hard sync tones. They're making this dance around by taking a stepped random voltage from random step to the exponential FM input. So as well as volt per octave controlling this oscillator and this one, gives these interesting little kind of dancing sync tones. I'm then going to a double saw wave rather than a standard saw, and using another stepped random to animate the detuning of these two saw waves. Finally, even though the linear FM is AC coupled, I am just plugging in an LFO. It gives some interesting addition to that kind of sweep tone. So because we can use negative voltage in either the sine, fold section or triangle drive section to actually reduce the level lower than these sliders, we can actually turn the volume down. This is just a sine wave and the pink trace there is just an LFO. And as I keep going to find that point that it will kind of hit silence, now if I replace that sine wave with an oscillator, we can start to get some pseudo ring modulation and AM synthesis tones. So simply swapping this triangle for a sine wave from another oscillator, we're straight into the business, these great pseudo ring mod tones. And this works just as well on the triangle. Again, really nice AM synthesis tones. With any kind of audio rate modulation, sync is super handy, but this slight detune and beating and life it gives can often be really nice animation, so I'm not syncing them here. This is a 3-layer patch looking at dynamic AM synthesis, along with a filtered sub and a spectrally processed saw wave. For this video, we'll take a look at the dynamic AM part of this patch, but an extended full patch rundown will be available soon for Patreon supporters, link in the description. This is the bass sine wave melody from the Variable Waveform Generator. And here's some static modulation from the sine wave on another oscillator. Now to make this dynamic, I will modulate the modulation using a VCA with an envelope to process the level of this sine wave before it modulates this fold amount. For a clearer idea of what's going on, let's listen to the modulation. This is the higher pitched sine that I'm modulating with. So try patching modulation into a VCA first, so you can modulate the level of it with envelopes or LFOs, allowing for more animated and dynamic modulation in your patches. Now if you got this far in the video, write hard sync in the comments, let's have some fun with it. Hope you enjoyed this overview of the module. If you're a Patreon supporter, there's 2 exclusive videos to come, and feel free to go join the community on Discord by signing up on Patreon below. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hard sync in the comments. Bye.